On the night the city prepared to count down the year, Stella James noticed something had changed. Not in the room. The ballroom was still washed in gold light, music floating like a promise no one fully believed. Not in the men watching from corners, speaking quietly into sleeves, scanning reflections. The change was in Lorenzo. He stood beside her as always, precise distance maintained, gaze forward. But his hand, steady in every crisis she had ever witnessed, curled once, slowly, like he was resisting an instinct he'd trained himself to kill. Stella didn't look at him. She knew better than to draw attention to danger. "Hello, beautiful people. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. Let's connect in the comments. Now, let's continue." 4 years. That's how long she had worked for Lorenzo Marino, without ever once mistaking proximity for permission. 4 years of arriving early, leaving late, organizing chaos into structure. 4 years of listening to men speak in codes she wasn't supposed to understand but somehow always did. 4 years of silences that felt deliberate, careful, like entire conversations held just beneath the surface of what could be said aloud. Lorenzo had rules. He never touched her unnecessarily, never asked about her life outside work, never lingered when others might notice. At first, Stella thought it was professionalism. Then she thought it was indifference. Now, standing in a ballroom where every exit had a man beside it and every conversation paused when she walked past, she wondered if it had always been something else entirely. "The caterers confirmed for 11, she said, checking her tablet without looking up. "Security swept the rooftop twice. No issues." Lorenzo's response was a single syllable. "Good." His voice never changed, never softened, never sharpened, just steady, controlled, the way people spoke when every word could be recorded. Stella glanced sideways at him. He wore black, as always. Expensive fabric that moved like water. His jaw was set, expression unreadable, but there was something in the way he held himself tonight, tighter than usual, like a wire pulled taut. "You expecting trouble?" she asked quietly. "Always." It wasn't a joke, she knew that. But the word landed differently this time, heavier, like it wasn't about business at all. The ballroom filled slowly, women in silk, men in sharper suits than their smiles. Conversations that sounded light but weren't. Laughter that stopped too quickly. Stella moved through the crowd with practiced ease, adjusting arrangements, redirecting questions, making sure nothing looked like effort. Lorenzo stayed visible but separate, speaking only when necessary, his presence alone enough to command attention. She had watched him do this 100 times. He never raised his voice, never threatened, never needed to. People simply knew, and knowing kept them careful. It was nearly 10 when she noticed the man by the east wall. He wasn't one of Lorenzo's. She knew the faces, memorized them the way she memorized schedules, exits, names that mattered. This man was new, watching too closely, not drinking. Stella moved toward the bar, angling her path so Lorenzo would see her shift. He did. Within seconds, 2 of his men repositioned. The stranger was gone before she reached the champagne. No fuss, no confrontation, just erasure. Stella picked up a glass she wouldn't drink and turned back toward the room. Lorenzo was already looking elsewhere, but his hand, resting against the edge of a table, flexed once, brief, controlled, like relief or restraint. "Enjoying yourself?" The voice came from behind her, dry and familiar. Marco, one of Lorenzo's longest-serving men. Older, sharper, with the kind of humor that felt like a test. Stella smiled without turning. Thrilled. "You should be. Best seat in the house." "Is that what this is?" Marco's silence was answer enough. She glanced at him then, catching the edge of something in his expression. Not quite warning, not quite concern. "Busy night," he said finally. "They all are." "Not like this." Stella's pulse kicked once, steady, controlled. She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. 11:30. The countdown was close now. Glasses refilled, voices rose. The room swelled with the kind of forced joy that came when people needed distraction from what they actually felt. Stella stood near the edge of the crowd, far enough from the center to breathe, close enough to appear engaged. Lorenzo was 3 steps away. Always 3 steps. Never 2. Never 4. She used to think it was coincidence. Now she understood it was geometry. The distance required to protect without appearing to care. 11:50. Someone handed her champagne. She accepted it without drinking, watching the room shift and settle like a living thing. Lorenzo hadn't moved in 20 minutes. He stood with his back to the wall, gaze sweeping the space in intervals so practiced she could time them. But when his eyes found her, just once, brief, barely a second, something in his expression stilled. Not softness, not longing, something closer to resignation, like he'd already made a decision he couldn't undo. 11:58. The music quieted. The crowd pressed closer. Voices began counting backward, loud and careless, the way people shouted when they believed safety was guaranteed. Stella felt the shift before she saw it. A tension in the room, a current beneath the noise. She turned slightly, scanning faces, looking for the wrongness she couldn't name. And then Lorenzo was beside her, not 3 steps away, right beside her, close enough that she felt the heat of him, the controlled stillness of his breathing. She didn't move, didn't speak. The countdown hit 10, 9, 8. His hand brushed hers, not accidental, not possessive, just contact, a warning, or a goodbye. Stella's breath caught. 7, 6. She turned her head, just slightly, enough to see his profile. 5, 4. Lorenzo was already looking at her, and for the first time in 4 years, he didn't look away. The room erupted in noise. Cheers, glasses clinking, music swelling, and in the chaos, in the single moment when no one was watching, Lorenzo leaned in. Not fast, not desperate. Controlled, deliberate. His mouth found hers for less than a breath. No urgency, no spectacle, just a kiss that felt like the end of something carefully built. Stella froze, not from fear, from understanding, because the room was too loud, the light too bright, and someone had seen. When Lorenzo pulled back, his expression was already reset, blank, professional, untouched. But his hand, still resting against hers, trembled once, just once. Stella's chest tightened. She opened her mouth to speak, and then she heard it, a phone buzzing, low, insistent. Lorenzo's gaze shifted past her, landing on one of his men across the room. The man's face went still. He lifted his phone, read something, and when he looked up again, his eyes found Stella first, not Lorenzo. Her. The noise of the celebration pressed in from all sides, but all Stella could hear was the silence between heartbeats, the realization settling like ice. She was no longer invisible, and that kiss, brief, reckless, impossible to take back, had just made her the most dangerous person in the room. The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. Stella didn't answer. She watched it ring from across her apartment, phone face down on the kitchen counter, vibrating against granite like a trapped insect. She knew who it was. She also knew that answering would confirm something she wasn't ready to admit, that the kiss had consequences neither of them could control. The ringing stopped, started again, stopped. Stella pulled her knees to her chest on the couch, still wearing the emerald dress from the party, and waited for the silence to settle. It didn't. Morning arrived with precision. Her alarm at 6, coffee at 6:15, shower by 6:30. Stella moved through her routine with the same efficiency she brought to work, ignoring the exhaustion behind her eyes and the tension coiled tight in her shoulders. She chose gray today. Professional. Forgettable. The dress went into the back of her closet where she wouldn't have to see it. Lorenzo's office building looked the same as always. Glass and steel, security at every entrance, men in dark suits who nodded without smiling. Stella swiped her badge and stepped into the elevator, watching the numbers climb with mechanical steadiness. 23rd floor. The doors opened, and immediately she felt it. The shift. Conversations that stopped mid-sentence when she passed, eyes that followed her too long. A receptionist who smiled but didn't quite meet her gaze. Stella kept walking, kept her expression neutral, but her pulse kicked once, sharp and certain. They know. Lorenzo's office door was closed. Marco stood beside it, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "He's on a call," Marco said before she could ask. "I'll wait. Might be a while." Stella met his eyes. "I'll wait." Marco studied her for a moment, something cautious in his expression, almost protective. Then he stepped aside. "Your desk," he said quietly. "Not here." It wasn't a suggestion. Stella nodded once and turned toward her workspace, feeling Marco's attention follow her all the way down the hall. Her desk was exactly as she'd left it. Files organized, pens aligned. Calendar updated through February. Everything in its place, except for the small envelope tucked beneath her keyboard. Stella froze. She glanced around the open floor, assistants typing, phones ringing, the hum of normalcy that felt suddenly staged. No one looked at her. Everyone was looking at her. She slid the envelope free and opened it carefully, keeping her movements small. Inside was a single sentence. Handwritten in script she didn't recognize. "Proximity has a price." No signature, no threat, just clarity. Stella reread it twice, then slipped the note into her bag and powered on her computer like nothing had happened. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was not. 10 o'clock. Lorenzo's door finally opened. 3 men exited, faces she recognized from other meetings, other crises. They didn't acknowledge her as they passed. Marco appeared in the hallway, gesturing toward the office. "Now." Stella stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked in. Lorenzo was at his desk, reviewing something on his tablet, posture immaculate. He didn't look up when she entered, didn't speak. Stella closed the door behind her and waited. Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, Lorenzo set the tablet down and leaned back in his chair. "Your schedule's changing," he said. No preamble, no softness. "Why?" "Because I'm telling you it is." Stella's jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." Lorenzo's gaze lifted then, sharp, controlled, and utterly unreadable. "You'll work remotely for the next 2 weeks. Marco will coordinate logistics. I don't need—" "It's not a request." The words landed like a door slamming shut. Stella held his stare, refusing to look away first. "You're moving me. I'm protecting you." "From what?" Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something in the air between them shifted, heavier, colder. "From being seen." The truth of it hit like a blade between ribs. Stella inhaled slowly, carefully, keeping her voice level. "I was already seen. Last night proved that." "Last night was a mistake." "Yours or mine?" Lorenzo didn't answer. He stood instead, moving toward the window with his back to her, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight beneath expensive fabric. "This conversation is over," he said quietly. Stella didn't move. "You think distance will fix this?" "I think distance will keep you alive." The admission came out harder than he'd intended, sharp enough to draw blood. Stella felt it land, felt the cost of it. She wanted to argue, wanted to push until something in him cracked wide enough to let the truth through. But she'd worked for Lorenzo Marino long enough to know when a wall wouldn't move, so instead she did the only thing she could. She smiled, dry, humorless, a little bit lethal. "You're 4 years too late for that." She was halfway to her desk when Marco intercepted her. "Remote access will be set up by noon," he said, falling into step beside her. "You'll have everything you need, except answers." Marco's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Those aren't in the budget." Stella stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "How bad is it?" Marco's expression sobered. For a moment, she thought he might lie, offer reassurance that would insult them both. Instead, he glanced down the hallway, checking, always checking, and lowered his voice. "Bad enough that you don't come back here until I tell you it's safe." Stella's chest tightened. "And if it's never safe?" Marco held her gaze. "Then you'll know why he kissed you." The words hit like a confession neither of them had permission to make. Stella opened her mouth to respond, but Marco was already walking away. She spent the rest of the morning packing her desk, personal items only. Files stayed. Access would transfer remotely. No one spoke to her. A few glanced over. Most didn't. By 11:30, her bag was full and her workspace looked like she'd never been there at all. Stella stood for a moment scanning the floor. The people, the patterns, the careful choreography of power that had once felt like safety. Now it just felt like surveillance. She turned toward the elevator and stopped. Lorenzo was standing near the reception desk, speaking quietly to someone on his phone. He hadn't looked at her once since their conversation, hadn't acknowledged her presence. But as she moved toward the exit, his gaze shifted, just briefly, just enough. Their eyes met, held, and in that single second, Stella saw what he'd been hiding beneath all that control, not indifference, not calculation, fear. The elevator doors closed. Stella exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, half expecting another cryptic warning. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. "He can't protect you if you're still close enough to matter." Stella stared at the message, read it twice, then looked up at the security camera in the elevator corner, its red light blinking steadily. Someone was always watching. She'd known that for years. What she hadn't known, what last night had made catastrophically clear, was that now they were watching her. Stella's apartment had never felt this small. 3 days of remote work, 3 days of video calls with her camera off and emails that arrived with military precision. 3 days of pretending distance made her safer when every hour proved the opposite. The threats didn't stop, they just got quieter. A package delivered to her building with no return address, opened by Marco's team before she ever saw it. Empty. Just a message. "We know where you live." A car idling outside her corner cafe for 20 minutes, gone before she finished her coffee. A voicemail from a number that didn't exist, nothing but breathing and a click. Stella documented everything, sent reports to Marco with timestamps and details, never mentioned them to Lorenzo. She knew he already knew. The video call connected at 9 a.m. sharp. Lorenzo's face filled her screen, composed, professional, the same mask he'd worn for 4 years. "Status update," he said without preamble. Stella pulled up her files. "Contracts finalized, scheduling confirmed through March. The Singapore deal needs your signature by Friday. Send it to Marco." "I always send it to you." "Not anymore." Stella's jaw tightened. She kept her voice level. "That's inefficient." "It's necessary." Their eyes met through the screen. 2 people pretending distance was strategy instead of cowardice. Lorenzo broke first. He looked down at something off-camera, expression unreadable. "Anything else?" Stella leaned back in her chair, studying him. He looked tired. Not visibly. Lorenzo never looked visibly anything. But there was something in the set of his shoulders, the way he held his jaw. That told her he hadn't slept. "Are you eating?" she asked. Lorenzo's gaze snapped back to hers. "Excuse me? You look like you're running on espresso and control. It's not sustainable." A beat of silence. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not even close, but something. "Concerned for my health, Miss James?" "Concerned you'll make bad decisions when you're exhausted." "I've been making bad decisions for weeks." The admission landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Stella's breath caught. Lorenzo seemed to realize what he'd said. His expression reset immediately. Blank, professional, unreachable. "We're done here," he said. Lorenzo. The screen went black. By day 5, Stella stopped waiting for permission. She began tracking patterns herself, the unknown numbers, the cars. The silences that felt too deliberate. She cross-referenced timestamps, mapped locations, built a picture of surveillance that would have impressed Marco if she'd shown it to him. She didn't. Because what she found wasn't random. It was coordinated, professional, and it had started 3 weeks before New Year's Eve. Before the kiss. Stella sat back in her chair, staring at the data spread across her laptop screen. Lorenzo hadn't been protecting her from exposure. He'd been protecting her from something that was already hunting her. The kiss hadn't made her visible, it had just made her impossible to deny. The call came at midnight. Not from Lorenzo, from Marco. "Get dressed," he said. No greeting, no explanation. Stella was already reaching for her jeans. "What happened?" "Nothing yet, but you need to move. Now." "Move where?" "I'm outside." The line went dead. Stella dressed in under 3 minutes, jeans, sweater, boots. Grabbed her laptop and phone. Checked the window. A black car idled at the curb, hazards blinking. She was out the door before her pulse could catch up. Marco didn't speak until they were 10 blocks away. "There was chatter tonight," he said, eyes on the road, "about you." "What kind of chatter?" "The kind that means people are bidding." Stella's chest tightened. "Bidding?" "Your leverage, against him. They think if they take you, Lorenzo loses focus." "Do they?" Marco glanced at her, brief, sharp. "What do you think?" Stella didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew the truth. Lorenzo had spent 4 years keeping her at arm's length precisely because losing her would destroy him, and now everyone else knew it too. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere he controls every exit." The safe house was 30 minutes outside the city, modern, isolated, surrounded by woods that looked peaceful and felt like a perimeter. Marco pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. "You'll stay here until we neutralize the threat." "How long will that take?" "However long it takes." Stella studied the house through the windshield. Dark windows, motion sensor lights, the kind of security that looked invisible until you needed it. "Is he coming?" Marco's silence was answer enough. Stella nodded once, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold. The house was furnished but impersonal. Clean lines, no photographs, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here. Stella set her bag down and walked through the space, cataloging exits and sightlines the way Lorenzo had trained her without ever saying he was training her. 2 doors, 1 front, 1 back, windows reinforced. Security panel by the entrance. She was safe. She was also alone. Stella sank onto the couch and pressed her palms to her eyes, exhaling slowly. This is what proximity costs. Not just danger, isolation. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, expecting Marco. It was Lorenzo. A single text. No explanation. "I'm sorry." Stella stared at the words. Read them twice. 3 times. Then typed back, "For which part?" The response came immediately. All of it. Stella's throat tightened. She wanted to call him, wanted to demand answers he wouldn't give, and confessions he couldn't afford. Instead, she typed, "You should sleep." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "So should you." Stella almost smiled. Almost. She set the phone down and leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere across the city, Lorenzo was doing the same. Both of them awake, both of them alone, both of them pretending distance could undo what one reckless kiss had made permanent. The sound came at 3 a.m., subtle, deliberate, the crunch of gravel outside. Stella was awake instantly, adrenaline sharpening her senses. She moved to the window, staying back from the glass, and peered through the gap in the curtains. A car sat at the end of the driveway. Engine off, lights off, just waiting. Stella's pulse kicked. She reached for her phone. Before she could dial, it buzzed in her hand. Unknown number. She answered without speaking. A voice, calm, professional, devoid of threat, said 4 words. "He can't save you." The line went dead. And the car's headlights flicked on. The headlights cut through the darkness like a verdict. Stella didn't move from the window, didn't reach for her phone again. Just watched as the car idled at the end of the driveway, engine silent, waiting. Not a threat, a test, to see if she'd run, if she'd panic, if Lorenzo's protection meant anything when she was alone. Stella counted her breaths, in for 4, out for 4, and stayed exactly where she was. After 2 minutes, the headlights went dark. The car didn't move. She pulled the curtain closed and walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water she wouldn't drink, and sat at the table where she could see both doors. Her phone stayed silent. The car stayed put. And somewhere across the city, Lorenzo was awake, calculating how many ways this could end badly. Stella knew because she was doing the same thing. Dawn came slowly. When Stella finally looked outside again, the car was gone. No tire tracks, no evidence it had ever been there. Just the gravel driveway and the woods beyond, perfectly still. She exhaled and checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Marco. No voicemails. 1 text from Lorenzo, time-stamped 4:17 a.m. Still there? Stella typed back, "Where else would I go?" The response came immediately, like he'd been holding his phone, waiting. Somewhere safer. She almost laughed. Safe doesn't exist in your world. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I know. Marco arrived at 9 with coffee and no apologies. "You didn't call," he said, setting a cup on the counter. "Didn't need to. There was a car outside for 3 hours. Stella met his eyes. "I noticed." Marco studied her, assessing, recalculating. Whatever he saw made him nod once, grudging respect buried beneath concern. "He wants you back in the city." "Why?" "Because keeping you isolated makes you easier to find." Stella processed that. "And being near him makes me harder to kill." "Apparently." She picked up the coffee, inhaled the steam. "That's a terrible plan." "It's the only plan." "What changed?" Marco leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Last night's visitor wasn't random. It was a message. They wanted Lorenzo to know they could reach you whenever they wanted." "And now?" "Now he's done pretending distance protects you." Stella's pulse kicked once, sharp and certain. "What does that mean?" Marco's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened, barely, briefly. "It means he's choosing you over strategy, which is either brave or suicidal." "I haven't decided yet." The drive back took 40 minutes. Stella watched the city rise from the horizon, buildings stacking like promises no one intended to keep. Marco didn't speak, didn't turn on the radio, just drove with the kind of focus that came from knowing every route could be a trap. They didn't go to the office. They went to Lorenzo's private residence, a place Stella had coordinated security for but never entered. Marco pulled into the underground garage, past 3 checkpoints and 2 guards who looked like they hadn't smiled in years. "He's upstairs," Marco said as they stepped into the elevator. "Does he know I'm coming?" "He's the one who sent me." The elevator climbed in silence. When the doors opened, Stella stepped into a hallway that felt more like a museum than a home. Clean lines, expensive art, nothing personal. Nothing that suggested Lorenzo Marino was anything other than a man who controlled empires and trusted no one. Marco gestured toward the end of the hall. "Last door." "You're not coming?" "He asked for you, not me." Stella's chest tightened. She walked down the hallway alone, footsteps muffled by carpet that probably cost more than her yearly salary, and stopped at the door. Knocked once. "Come in." Lorenzo stood by the window, back to the door, hands in his pockets. He didn't turn when she entered, didn't acknowledge her at all. Stella closed the door and waited. The silence stretched between them like every unspoken thing they'd been avoiding for 4 years. Finally, Lorenzo spoke. "You should have called. I handled it." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" He turned then, and the sight of him hit harder than she'd expected. He looked exactly like he always did, controlled, composed, untouchable, except for his eyes, which looked like he'd been holding the world together with nothing but will, and was finally starting to fracture. "The point," he said quietly, "is that you're here because of me. I'm here because I chose to stay. That doesn't make it cost less." Stella crossed the room until she was close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands stayed in his pockets because letting them free might mean reaching for her. "You think pushing me away solves this," she said. "I think keeping you alive solves this." "And if I'm already dead the moment I walk away from you?" Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something behind it cracked, just enough to let the truth through. "Then we're both making the same mistake." The admission landed between them like a confession neither of them had permission to make. Stella inhaled slowly. "What happens now?" Lorenzo held her gaze. "Now you stay where I can see you, and we survive long enough to make that matter." The kiss had happened once, brief, controlled, catastrophic. But standing in Lorenzo's apartment with danger closing in from every direction and nowhere left to hide, Stella understood something she hadn't before. That kiss wasn't the beginning of something. It was the middle. What came before, the 4 years of distance, the careful restraint, the unspoken rules, that had been survival. What came after, this moment, this choice, this deliberate step toward each other, despite every logical reason not to. That was the dangerous part. Lorenzo's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. His expression went still. "What?" Stella asked. He showed her the screen. A photo, taken last night, through the window of the safe house, of her standing exactly where she'd stood, watching the car. The message beneath it read, "Next time, we won't just watch." Stella's breath caught. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, and then, from somewhere in the building, an alarm began to sound. The alarm cut through the apartment like a blade through silk. Lorenzo moved before Stella could process what the sound meant, hand on her wrist, pulling her away from the window, positioning himself between her and the glass. Not dramatic, not frantic, just decisive. "Stay here," he said, already moving toward the door. "What's happening?" "Breach. Lower level." He was gone before she could ask anything else. Stella stood in the center of the room, pulse steady, mind calculating. A breach meant someone had made it past 3 security checkpoints, which meant either exceptional skill or inside knowledge. Neither option was comforting. She moved away from the window, scanned the room for exits she already knew were limited, and pulled out her phone. No signal. Jammed, professional. The alarm stopped after 90 seconds. The silence that followed felt worse. Stella waited, listening to the muffled sounds of movement from somewhere below. Footsteps, voices, the controlled chaos of men trained for this exact scenario. Her door opened. Marco stepped in, gun visible beneath his jacket, expression unreadable. "False alarm," he said. "No, it wasn't." Marco's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "No, it wasn't." "What did they want?" "To see how fast we react, how tight the perimeter is." He glanced toward the hallway. "They're mapping us." Stella's chest tightened. "For what?" "For when they come back and it's not a test." Lorenzo returned 20 minutes later. His jacket was gone, sleeves rolled to his elbows. No visible emotion on his face, but his hands, always steady, adjusted his watch twice in the span of 10 seconds. Stella recognized the tell. He was recalculating. "You should eat," she said. Lorenzo stopped mid-step, looked at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't recognize. "What? You haven't eaten, and you're about to make decisions that require clarity." She gestured toward the kitchen. "So eat." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then, impossibly, he almost laughed. Not quite. Just an exhale that sounded like one. "You're managing me." "Someone has to." Lorenzo shook his head once, something shifting in his expression. Not softness, but recognition. Like he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone refuse to treat him carefully. "I don't have time." "You don't have time to collapse? So sit." He sat. Stella made coffee and found bread in a cabinet that looked like it had never been opened. She worked in silence, aware of Lorenzo watching her from the table, his gaze tracking her movements with the same precision he used to assess threats. "You're different here," he said quietly. "Here. In my space. Less careful." Stella set the coffee in front of him. "I've been careful for 4 years. It didn't keep me safe." Lorenzo picked up the cup but didn't drink. "That's not why you were careful." "No? You were careful because you knew what I was trying not to do." The admission landed between them like something fragile. Stella leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying him. "And what were you trying not to do?" Lorenzo held her gaze. "This." The word hung in the air. Simple, devastating, true. Stella's pulse kicked once, sharp and certain. She wanted to move closer, wanted to ask what this meant exactly. Wanted to cross the distance he'd spent years maintaining and make him admit what the kiss had already proven. Instead, she said, "You're going to need more than coffee." Lorenzo's mouth curved, barely, briefly. "Probably." They ate in silence, not uncomfortable, just cautious. Like two people navigating a room full of tripwires they'd set themselves. Halfway through, Lorenzo's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, expression shifting. Something careful, controlled. "What?" Stella asked. They identified the breach point, service entrance. Someone overrode the lock. "Inside job?" "Maybe, or someone who knows our systems too well." Stella processed that. How many people have that kind of access? Lorenzo didn't answer, which was answer enough. "You think it's one of your own?" "I think trust is a liability I can't afford right now." The words came out flat, matter of fact, like he was discussing logistics instead of admitting that the world he'd built was fracturing from the inside. Stella set down her cup. "Then we adapt." Lorenzo looked at her. "We? You're not doing this alone anymore. So yes, we." Something in his expression shifted. Not relief, not gratitude. Something closer to fear, like her choosing him was the most dangerous thing that had happened yet. Marco returned at noon with updates and bad news. "The breach was a distraction," he said, spreading photos across the table. "While we were securing the building, they moved on your office downtown, took files from Stella's desk." Stella's stomach dropped. "Which files?" "Everything. Contacts, schedules, access codes." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "When?" 20 minutes ago. Clean extraction. No one saw them enter or leave." Stella's mind raced through what had been on her desk. Meetings, routes, names of people Lorenzo protected. Everything someone would need to dismantle his operation piece by piece. "They're not coming for you," she said quietly. Lorenzo turned to her. "What?" "They're not coming for you. They're coming for everyone around you. They take your infrastructure, your people, your—" She stopped, realization hitting like ice water. "They're isolating you." Marco nodded slowly. "She's right. This isn't about killing Lorenzo. It's about making him powerless first." Lorenzo stood, hands flat on the table, shoulders rigid. For 5 seconds he didn't speak, didn't move. Just breathed like someone trying to calculate the exact moment everything fell apart. Finally, he looked at Stella. "I need to move you again." "No. This isn't negotiable." "Neither am I." Lorenzo's expression hardened. "You think staying close to me makes you safer. I think leaving makes me a target they don't have to work around you to reach." Stella held his gaze, refusing to flinch, refusing to soften. "I'm already exposed. Moving me just makes it easier. Lorenzo stared at her like she'd just declared war. Maybe she had. His phone rang. Unknown number. Lorenzo answered on speaker. Silence. Then a voice. Calm, professional, familiar. Lorenzo. He went still. Dimitri. You got my message. Several. Good. Then you understand the terms. There are no terms. A pause. Then something that might have been a laugh. We'll see. You have 48 hours to consider my offer. After that, I stop being polite. You were never polite. No, but I was patient. The line went dead. Marco swore under his breath. Lorenzo set the phone down slowly, deliberately, like it might explode if handled wrong. Stella didn't move. Who is Dimitri? Lorenzo's gaze lifted to hers. Someone I thought I'd buried 5 years ago. Dimitri's name hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Stella watched Lorenzo's expression remain perfectly controlled while everything beneath it recalibrated. She'd seen him manage crises, negotiate with men who traded in violence, maintain composure through situations that would break most people. This was different. This was personal. 5 years is a long time to stay dead, Marco said quietly. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Apparently not long enough. What does he want? Stella asked. Lorenzo turned to face her, and for a moment she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not fear, exactly, but its calculated cousin. The knowledge that some debts couldn't be paid, only postponed. What everyone wants, he said. Power, territory, revenge. For what? Lorenzo didn't answer. Marco did. For being erased. The next 4 hours moved with surgical precision. Lorenzo made calls. Marco coordinated security. Men arrived and left with instructions Stella wasn't meant to hear but absorbed anyway. She stayed in the apartment, watching the city through bulletproof glass, mapping patterns in the way Lorenzo's operation functioned under pressure. No panic, no chaos, just controlled escalation. Like they'd rehearsed for this exact scenario. Maybe they had. At some point, someone brought food no one ate. At another, Lorenzo disappeared into his office and didn't emerge for 90 minutes. When he finally did, his expression was set in a way that made Stella's stomach tighten. I'm moving you tonight, he said. Not a question, not a discussion, an order. Stella stood from where she'd been sitting by the window. We already covered this. That was before Dimitri confirmed he knows where you are. He's known where I am since New Year's Eve. And now he's actively moving on that information. Lorenzo crossed the room until he was close enough that she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands stayed deliberately at his sides. I can't protect you here. You can't protect me anywhere if I'm not where you can see me. That's not how this works. Then explain how it works. Lorenzo exhaled, sharp, frustrated. You leave. I handle Dimitri. You come back when it's over. And if it's not over? Silence. Stella stepped closer, refusing to back down. You're trying to solve me like I'm a problem. I'm not a problem, Lorenzo. I'm a person who's choosing to stay. That choice could get you killed. So could leaving. His expression fractured, just slightly, just enough. You don't understand what he's capable of. Then tell me. Lorenzo looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Then he said the thing she knew cost him. He takes what matters most, and he makes sure you watch it break. Night fell with the weight of inevitability. Marco brought transfer papers Lorenzo had already signed. Stella refused to look at them. You're being irrational, Lorenzo said. I'm being informed. She gestured toward the window. You think moving me to another safe house, another city, another country makes me less visible? He already has my files, my roots, my entire professional existence. Running just gives him a moving target. Staying gives him a stationary one. No. Staying gives you leverage. Lorenzo went still. Explain. Stella held his gaze. He's counting on you doing exactly this. Isolating me. Sending me away. Making decisions from a place of fear instead of strategy. That's when you're vulnerable. When you're distracted. I'm not. You are. She took a breath. But if I stay, if we work together, he has to account for two people making decisions instead of one making mistakes. Marco, watching from the doorway, made a sound that might have been approval. Lorenzo shot him a look that could kill, then turned back to Stella. You think you can outthink a man who's spent 5 years planning this? I think we can. She paused. If you stop trying to protect me from information I need. The silence stretched between them, waited, dangerous. Finally, Lorenzo spoke. This isn't a negotiation. Neither is my leaving. Something in his expression shifted, not surrender, just the recognition that some battles couldn't be won through force. You're impossible, he said quietly. Stella almost smiled. I learned from the best. At midnight, they sat across from each other at Lorenzo's dining table. Marco had left an hour ago. The apartment was silent except for the distant hum of the city. Lorenzo had opened a file, everything he knew about Dimitri's operation, his movements, his resources. Stella read in silence, absorbing details that should have terrified her but instead just sharpened her focus. He has contacts in the city, she said. People on your payroll. I know. Then why haven't you moved on them? Because I don't know which ones. Stella looked up. But I might. Lorenzo's expression tightened. How? I've processed every employment file, every security clearance, every vendor contract for 4 years. I know who's been where, who's had access to what. She tapped the file. If there's a pattern, I can find it. Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, studying her. This is what you meant about leverage. This is what I meant about partnership. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe, or the beginning of trust built on something other than distance. Lorenzo reached across the table, hand stopping just short of hers. Not touching, not quite, just close enough to matter. If you do this, he said quietly, there's no going back to before. Before ended the moment you kissed me. His hand shifted, barely an inch, fingertips brushing hers in a contact so brief it might not have happened at all. But it did, and it changed everything. The call came at 2 a.m. Marco's voice, tight with urgency. We've got movement. 3 vehicles heading toward your location. Lorenzo was already standing. ETA? 5 minutes. Lock it down. He ended the call and turned to Stella. Stay away from the windows. What's happening? They're coming. Before she could respond, the lights went out. Not just in the apartment. The entire building. Stella's breath caught. In the darkness, Lorenzo's voice came low and controlled. Don't move. Don't make a sound. She heard him shift position, heard the quiet click of a weapon being drawn. Then, from somewhere far below, the sound of glass breaking and footsteps coming closer. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Stella's pulse hammered against her ribs, but she kept her breathing shallow, controlled. Lorenzo had moved. She couldn't see him in the darkness, but she felt his presence shift, positioning himself between her and whatever was coming, always between her and the threat. Even now. A beat of silence. Then the door opened, not kicked in, not forced, just opened, like whoever stood on the other side had a key. Emergency lights flickered on, dim, blue-tinted, casting everything in the color of danger. Marco stood in the doorway, weapon drawn but lowered. His expression was carefully blank. Clear, he said. False alarm. Lorenzo didn't move. Explain. Power surge. Maintenance is on it. The vehicles were ours. Perimeter reinforcement. You said 3 vehicles were heading here. They were. I didn't say they were hostile. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. You didn't say they weren't. Marco's mouth curved, barely. You're getting paranoid in your old age. I'm getting cautious in my threatened one." Stella exhaled slowly, adrenaline still coursing through her veins, making her fingers numb. Lorenzo turned toward her, and in the half-light she saw something in his expression that looked almost like apology. Almost. "You can breathe now," he said quietly. "I was breathing. You were holding it." "So were you." Marco cleared his throat. "I'll be outside." The door closed behind him, leaving them alone in the dim emergency lighting that made everything feel temporary. "This is what it's going to be," Lorenzo said. "Every sound, every shadow, every call at 2 a.m. Stella wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from the delayed shock trying to surface. "I know." "You don't." He moved closer, and for the first time since she'd met him, there was something unguarded in the way he looked at her. "You know the theory, the logistics, the risk assessment. You don't know what it feels like to live inside that risk every single day. Then show me." "Stella." "I'm not asking for protection. I'm asking for information." She held his gaze. "If you want me to survive this, stop treating me like something fragile." Lorenzo stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something she'd never seen him do. He sat down on the floor, just lowered himself to the ground, back against the wall, and gestured to the space beside him. "Sit." Stella hesitated, then joined him, their shoulders not quite touching. The silence stretched between them, different now, less defensive. "Dimitri and I grew up in the same world," Lorenzo said finally. "Different families, same rules. We were supposed to be allies. What happened? I chose control. He chose chaos." Lorenzo's voice stayed level, but something beneath it sharpened. 5 years ago, he crossed a line, went after civilians, children, said it was strategy. I called it what it was. Murder. "Yes." Stella absorbed that. "So you removed him." "I tried to." Lorenzo's hand flexed once against his knee. "Clearly, I failed." "You couldn't have known." "I should have." He turned his head, looking at her in the half-light. "That's what power means. Knowing, anticipating, making sure the threats don't resurface." "You're not omniscient." "No. But I'm responsible." The weight of it pressed between them. His burden, his empire, his absolute refusal to let anything he couldn't control exist in his world. Stella understood then why he'd kept her at arm's length for 4 years. Not because he didn't want her, because wanting her meant she became something he couldn't afford to lose. "You can't protect everyone," she said quietly. "I can try." "And when trying isn't enough?" Lorenzo held her gaze. "Then I adapt." The lights came back on at 3 a.m. Harsh, sudden, exposing. They both stood, the moment broken, distance reasserting itself like muscle memory. Lorenzo checked his phone, messages from Marco, updates on perimeter status, confirmation that the building was secure. "You should sleep," he said without looking at her. "So should you." "I don't sleep during active threats." "Then I don't either." Lorenzo finally turned, something shifting in his expression, exasperation and respect in equal measure. "You're going to make this impossible, aren't you?" "I'm going to make this partnership." Stella crossed her arms. "Which means you stop making unilateral decisions about my safety." Partnership implies equal risk. It also implies equal information. Lorenzo studied her, calculating, reassessing, seeing her the way he probably saw every strategic asset in his world, except she wasn't an asset, and they both knew it. "Fine," he said finally, "partnership. But that means you follow my lead when things go wrong." Define things going wrong. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. If I tell you to leave and not look back, I'll consider it. Stella, that's the best you're getting. His mouth curved, barely, briefly. You're going to get us both killed. Or keep us both alive. She moved closer. Just a step, just enough. Your choice. Lorenzo's expression went still. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her. Thought the restraint that had defined them for 4 years might finally crack. Instead, he said, "My office. 20 minutes. Bring everything you know about personnel access. All business, all control." But when he turned to leave, his hand brushed hers. Brief, deliberate. A promise or a goodbye, she couldn't tell. Stella spent the next 15 minutes compiling files on her laptop. Employment records, security clearances, anyone who'd had access to her desk, her computer, her schedule. The pattern was there. She could feel it. She just needed to see it. At minute 16, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it, pulse kicking, answered without speaking. The voice on the other end was smooth, accented, familiar from Lorenzo's descriptions. "Stella James, we haven't been formally introduced." Her breath caught. "Dimitri." "Very good." Lorenzo chose well. A pause. "I wanted you to know, the attack tonight? That was a courtesy, a demonstration of reach. What do you want?" "I want Lorenzo to understand that the things he values are no longer protected, starting with you." Another pause, weighted with intention. "You have 36 hours. After that, I stop making calls." The line went dead. Stella stood frozen, phone still pressed to her ear. Then she turned toward Lorenzo's office. The door was open. He was already looking at her, and from the expression on his face, she knew he'd heard everything. Lorenzo was already moving before Stella reached the office. Not toward her, toward his phone, toward Marco, toward the machinery of response he'd spent years perfecting. "Get everyone on surveillance. I want every call traced, every number identified, every—" "He used a burner," Stella said quietly. Lorenzo stopped mid-sentence, turned. "What?" "Dimitri, the call came from a disposable phone. He's not stupid enough to let you trace him." Marco appeared in the doorway, weapon visible, expression grim. "He called her directly?" "Yes," Stella said before Lorenzo could answer for her. "What did he say?" Stella held Lorenzo's gaze as she answered. "That you have 36 hours, that tonight was a demonstration, that after the deadline, he stops being polite." Marco swore under his breath. Lorenzo's expression went perfectly still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. "He's accelerating," Marco said. "He's baiting." Lorenzo moved to his desk, pulled up a screen, began typing with controlled precision. "He wants me reactive instead of strategic." "So what do we do?" Stella asked. Lorenzo didn't look up. "We dismantle his operation before he dismantles mine. In 36 hours. In 36 hours. Stella moved closer to the desk, scanning the data Lorenzo had pulled up. Locations, contacts, financial transactions threading through shell companies and offshore accounts. "This is incomplete," she said. "I'm aware." "I can fill in the gaps." Lorenzo's hands stilled on the keyboard. "How?" "The files they took from my desk. I remember most of them. Names, dates, access points. If Dimitri has people inside your organization, they'll show up in the cross-reference." Marco looked at Lorenzo. "She's right. We've been looking from the outside in. She can work inside out." Lorenzo stood, moved to the window, hands in his pockets. For 10 seconds he didn't speak, didn't move, just calculated the cost of trusting her with information that could destroy him if she chose wrong. Finally, he turned. "If you do this, you see everything. No filters, no protection from what you'll learn. I don't want protection. You might when you understand what I've done to stay alive." Stella held his gaze. "Try me." Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression, not quite respect, not quite fear. Maybe recognition that she'd already crossed too many lines to turn back now. "Marco, give her access." They worked through the night. Stella at Lorenzo's computer, cross-referencing personnel files against transaction records, travel logs, communication patterns. Lorenzo on his phone, calling in favors, activating networks, moving pieces on a board only he could see. Marco coordinated security, bringing updates every 30 minutes like clockwork. At 6 a.m., Stella found it. "Here," she said, pulling up 2 files side by side. Lorenzo moved behind her chair, close enough that she felt the heat of him. "Personnel records for 3 security contractors," she continued. "All hired in the last 6 months, all with access to building layouts, my schedule, your movements." "That's not unusual." "No, but this is." She highlighted a transaction. "They're all being paid from the same offshore account, different amounts, different dates, but same source." Lorenzo leaned closer, scanning the data. "That's one of Dimitri's shells." "Exactly." Marco appeared in the doorway. "So we have our leaks." "We have 3 of them," Lorenzo said. "There could be more." Stella scrolled through more files, searching for patterns. "If there are, they'll show the same payment structure. Give me 2 more hours." Lorenzo checked his watch. "You have one." At 7 a.m., they had 6 names. At 7:30, Marco had detained all of them. By 8, the interrogations had begun in the building's lower levels, places Stella wasn't invited to see. She didn't ask what happened there, she already knew. Lorenzo returned at 9 Sunai, face impassive, hands clean. "They confirmed Dimitri's planning something for tonight," he said. "Location unknown, target unknown, but it's designed to be public." "Public how?" Stella asked. "Spectacle? Maximum visibility?" "He wants witnesses." "To what?" Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "To me, losing control." The admission landed heavy between them. Marco set down his coffee. "So we cancel everything, lock down, wait him out." "That's what he wants," Stella said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. "He's not planning an attack," she continued, working through the logic. "He's planning a demonstration. He wants to prove Lorenzo can't protect the things he values, which means—" "He needs me visible," Lorenzo finished. "He needs me in a position where I have to choose between maintaining control and protecting someone." "You," Marco said, looking at Stella. "Me," she confirmed. Silence settled over the room. Finally, Lorenzo spoke. "Then we don't give him the choice." "Meaning?" "Meaning you leave, today, now. Marco escorts you out of the city, out of the country if necessary. You disappear until this is over." Stella stood. "No, this isn't negotiable." "Yes, it is, because you need me here. I need you alive. You need me as leverage." Stella moved around the desk until she was facing him directly. "If I leave, Dimitri wins without firing a shot. He proves you're vulnerable, that you can be controlled, that love—" She stopped, the word hanging between them. "That caring about someone makes you weak." Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something behind it fractured. "And if you stay, he targets you. He's already targeting me. The only question is whether I'm useful while he does it." Marco made a sound that might have been admiration. "She's not wrong." Lorenzo shot him a look that could kill, then turned back to Stella. "If you stay, you follow every order I give. No hesitation, no negotiation. Within reason." "Stella, within reason, Lorenzo, I'm not a chess piece." His jaw tightened, but he nodded once. "Within reason." The call came at noon. Dimitri's voice, smooth and inevitable. "I assume you found my gifts." Lorenzo had it on speaker. "We did." "Good. Then you know I'm serious." "I've always known that." "Have you?" A pause. "Because you're still keeping her close. That seems unwise." "Or strategic." Dimitri laughed, genuine, delighted. "Oh, Lorenzo, you always were better at this than you admitted. So tell me, what's your play?" "You'll find out tonight." "Will I?" Another pause, heavier this time. "Midnight. The gala hall downtown. You know the one. Bring Stella. Come alone. Let's see if your control holds when everyone's watching. The line went dead. Marco swore. Stella's chest tightened. Lorenzo set down the phone with careful precision. He's baiting us into a public confrontation, Marco said. It's a trap. Obviously. So we don't go. Lorenzo looked at Stella. What do you think? She understood what he was asking. Not whether they should go, but whether she was willing to walk into controlled danger with him. Whether she trusted him to keep them both alive when everything went wrong. Stella held his gaze. I think we show him that control isn't weakness. Lorenzo almost smiled. Then we go. Marco shook his head. This is insane. Probably, Lorenzo agreed. Prepare the team. Full tactical. Every exit covered. And if he makes a move, we respond with precision. No panic, no chaos. Lorenzo's expression hardened. He wants spectacle. We'll give him control. They had 12 hours. Stella spent them memorizing exits, studying the gala hall's layout, understanding every angle Dimitri might use. Lorenzo spent them on the phone, positioning people, establishing protocols, building redundancy into every plan. At 11 p.m., Stella changed into the dress someone had delivered. Elegant, understated, armored beneath the silk. At 11:30, Lorenzo appeared in her doorway, wearing black like always, expression unreadable. He looked at her for a long moment, then said the thing neither of them could avoid. If this goes wrong? It won't. If it does? Stella moved closer, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the control it took to stay composed. If it does, we adapt. Together? Lorenzo's hand lifted, almost reaching for her face, almost breaking the restraint they'd maintained. Instead, he adjusted her necklace. Professional? Distant. Stay close, he said quietly. Always have. The car arrived at 11:45. They drove through the city in silence, Marco in the front, bodyguards flanking them in separate vehicles. The gala hall loomed ahead, glass and steel and light. Too many windows, too many sightlines, too many ways for this to go catastrophically wrong. They pulled up to the entrance. Lorenzo stepped out first, scanned the crowd, then offered his hand. Stella took it. The cameras flashed immediately, and somewhere in the crowd, Dimitri was watching. The gala hall was full of people who traded in secrets. Stella felt their eyes track her and Lorenzo as they entered, politicians, businessmen, others who lived in the spaces between legal and necessary. The kind of crowd that understood power came with cost. Lorenzo's hand stayed at the small of her back. Not possessive, protective. She scanned the room methodically, cataloging faces, exits, the bodyguards positioned at every entrance like pieces on a chessboard. He's here, she said quietly. I know. Where? Everywhere. Lorenzo's voice stayed level. He wants us to feel surrounded. Marco appeared at Lorenzo's shoulder, speaking low enough that only they could hear. Second floor balcony, east side, 3 men. One of them matches Dimitri's profile. Lorenzo didn't look up. Confirmed? 90%. Then he wants to be seen. Lorenzo's hand shifted against Stella's back. Brief pressure, a warning. Stay visible, stay calm. The crowd moved around them like water around stone. Midnight approached with mechanical precision. Stella accepted champagne she wouldn't drink, made small talk with people whose names she'd forget immediately, moved through the choreography of public appearance while her pulse counted down the seconds. At 11:58, the lights dimmed. A countdown appeared on screens throughout the hall, New Year's tradition even though they were weeks past. Stella's breath caught. Lorenzo's hand found hers. Whatever happens next, I know. You don't. His fingers tightened around hers. But thank you for staying anyway. The countdown hit 10, 9, 8. The crowd began to chant, voices rising. 7, 6. Stella felt Lorenzo tense beside her. 5, 4. Marco's voice in Lorenzo's earpiece, too quiet for her to hear. 3, 2. Lorenzo pulled her closer, not dramatic, not desperate, just deliberate. 1. The room erupted in noise. And nothing happened. No gunfire, no explosion, no attack, just celebration and confusion, and Lorenzo's hand still wrapped around hers like an anchor. "He's not here," Marco said, appearing beside them. "The balcony's empty. They were decoys." Stella's stomach dropped. "Then where?" Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered, already knowing. Dimitri's voice came through smooth and amused. "Clever, wasn't it? Making you think I'd be predictable." "What do you want?" Lorenzo asked, close enough to hear. "I wanted to prove a point, that your control is an illusion. That the moment you care about something, someone, you become vulnerable." "You proved nothing." "Didn't I?" A pause. "Tell me, Lorenzo, how does it feel knowing I could have taken her at any moment tonight? That every second you stood there, I was watching? That the only reason she's alive is because I allowed it?" Lorenzo's expression went perfectly still. Stella felt the shift in him. Not fear, but calculation. "You allowed it," Lorenzo said slowly, "because taking her would have been easy. And you don't want easy. You want me broken." Silence on the line. Then Dimitri laughed. "You always did understand me. Which is why I know this ends one of 2 ways. Tell me. You keep escalating until someone dies, or we negotiate terms that let us both survive." "Negotiate." Dimitri said the word like it tasted wrong. "After everything?" "After everything." Lorenzo's hand tightened around Stella's, "because neither of us wants a war that destroys what we've built." Another pause. Longer this time. "You've changed," Dimitri said finally. "The Lorenzo I knew would have come for me already. The Lorenzo you knew didn't have anything worth protecting more than pride." The admission hung in the air. Stella's chest tightened. "She's made you weak," Dimitri said. "She's made me careful." Lorenzo glanced at Stella. "There's a difference." The line went quiet. Then, "I'll consider your proposal. You have 48 hours to present terms. If I don't like them, you'll escalate, I know." "Good." The call ended. They left the gala hall at 12:30. No fanfare, no drama, just 3 people walking through controlled chaos toward a future that wasn't guaranteed. In the car, Stella finally exhaled. "That was strategic," Lorenzo finished. "He wanted to prove he could reach you. I proved he couldn't break me." "What happens now?" "Now we negotiate, carve out territory, establish boundaries." Lorenzo looked at her. "Make sure he understands that you're not leverage. You're a line he doesn't cross." Marco glanced at them through the rearview mirror. "That's optimistic." "It's necessary." Dawn found them back at Lorenzo's apartment. Safe, exhausted, still breathing. Stella stood by the window, watching the city wake up below. Lorenzo appeared beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You could still leave," he said quietly. "Disappear. Live somewhere he'd never find you." "I could." Stella turned to face him. "But I won't." "Why?" She almost laughed. "You're asking me why I'm choosing to stay in a world that might kill me?" "Yes." Stella held his gaze. "Because for 4 years, you kept me at distance to keep me safe. And I let you. But safety isn't the same as living." Lorenzo's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through the control. "This isn't a fairy tale." "I don't want a fairy tale." She moved closer. "I want whatever this is. Dangerous and complicated and probably a terrible idea." "Definitely a terrible idea." "Then we'll be terrible together." Lorenzo's hand lifted, finally, after 4 years of restraint, and touched her face. Gentle, deliberate. "If we do this," he said, "there's no going back to before." "Before ended the moment you kissed me." His mouth curved, almost a smile. "You keep saying that." Because it's true. Lorenzo leaned in, not rushed, not desperate, just inevitable. The kiss was softer than the first, more deliberate, a choice instead of a mistake. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "We have 48 hours to restructure an empire," he said. "Then we should probably get started." Lorenzo laughed, quiet, real, the sound of someone who'd forgotten what relief felt like. "Probably." 1 year later, on New Year's Eve, they stood in Lorenzo's apartment. No gala, no crowd, no spectacle, just two people who'd chosen danger over safety and survived long enough for it to matter. The countdown played on TV in the background. 10, 9, 8. Stella turned to Lorenzo. "Any regrets?" He considered. "Several. None about you." "Romantic." "Honest. 3, 2, 1. This time, when Lorenzo kissed her, there were no cameras, no threats, no witnesses, just them. And the quiet certainty that some risks were worth taking, even when, especially when, they cost everything.